Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. On behalf of Girls Health Ed, a proud member of PMNCH, I am so excited to welcome you to this exciting virtual webinar that we are having on youth grassroots advocacy for CSE. Some housekeeping before we get started. Please live tweet and share on social media as the webinar is taking place. We'll be using the hashtag POINT8. So number 1, spell POINT8 in honor of 1.8 billion. On behalf of Girls Health Ed, I would first like to thank PMNCH for convening the Global Forum for Adolescents, the largest gathering of adolescents in the world, for this very important conversation. To set the stage for our conversation today, I would like to start by reading a poem from my newly published book, Psyche. It's called Listen to the Kids. Listen to the kids. Grown-ups often have the false impression that they know better, that the kids should just listen. That's not always true. Grown-ups, kids are often closer to the eternal source than we are. We must not forget that despite their limited experience in this lifetime, and perhaps their limited knowledge, they are troves of wisdom. We must remember that they are not growing up in the same world that we did. No one knows what they're going through better than we do. Sometimes the kids do know best. It is our turn to shut up and listen. So we can replace the word kids in that poem with adolescents. The adolescents have spoken. They want access to healthy food, free menstrual products, clean water, roads, safe environments. We can give them all of that and more with comprehensive sexuality education. Comprehensive sexuality education is not just about health outcomes or about sexual and reproductive health outcomes at that. It is about the core of what it means to be a human being and how we interact with our world as human beings. So on our panel today, we will be discussing the importance of comprehensive sexuality education for adolescent health, and we'll be hearing from our esteemed panel about how they, as youth activists, have led grassroots campaigns to build up adolescents and promote comprehensive sexuality education and the issues that are important to them in their communities. With that, I would like to introduce our esteemed keynote speaker, Sankara from Women in Dev and formerly from Zana, Africa. Sankara, over to you, please, for our keynote address.
Well, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be joining all of us on this call, this webinar today. I think we cannot underscore really the importance of programming for adolescents and doing it well and doing it properly. I wanted to start off with something that's, maybe just a little bit personal around why I think that this work is important. And one of the things that what I had wanted to highlight was a story that was going to be a bit longer, but I chose a shorter one. So the first time, I have 2 children, and my first pregnancy, I was 23. I had already done university, I'd already done high school, but nobody had told me anything about sex education to the extent that I have had to learn post having children. And in my work, as I have continued to work with young people and very specifically with adolescents, one of the things that I have quickly realized and learned is that we make an assumption, Pavita, just as you said, we think we know better, we think we know, we think we understand. Well, at the beginning of my career, when I was working in urban slums, these are informal settlements where you'd ideally have, a lot of young people living in one space, and poverty is the common denominator. And in those types of spaces, there's no access to proper infrastructure. So then consecutively, what that means is that there's no access to sanitation, there's no access to good water, there's no access to information, education, knowledge. Girls don't rise to their agency. There's so many competing priorities and so many competing vices that would ideally be running towards the adolescent girl, and at an age where they don't have voice, and if they have it, they do not know how to use their voices to really elevate what their needs are. So one of the things that I quickly learned was that a lot of girls were getting pregnant. And, sometimes we like to say that pregnancy is more of a result, because the truth is, if we already come in at the beginning and give this comprehensive sex health education, comprehensive reproductive health education, this is a result that we may not necessarily have to have at the table. And particularly when you have girls who are getting pregnant at an age that's one, very young, and then two, girls who are giving birth in spaces where already poverty is the main issue within those spaces, because then that means that even access to proper health, let alone education, is not, it's just simply not accessed. I was looking at the numbers, and I found that every day we have 20,000 girls under the age of 18 that give birth every single day. That is about 7.3 million births across the world. In total, we have about 385,000 births in the world. This is even women who are even older. So you can imagine 20,000 is such a huge number. And this huge number does not necessarily have a trajectory that is already well-defined. And by trajectory well-defined, I mean, it does not mean that they go back to school after they have their babies, or they even complete secondary school education, or even they complete primary school education. The sexual debut, for example, in Kenya is at the age of 9. That is when young girls have their first sexual experience. A majority of those girls will go ahead and have children. So now you have a situation where you have children that are having children. Well, you could make, in some cases, and especially in marginalized spaces, a case can be made where they say, but then, how about the traditional values? How about the cultural factors? How about, particularly with hard-to-reach populations? But then the truth is, even with forced marriages, and even with girls who are having babies before time, if we equip them with the knowledge and the comprehensive health education that they need, these numbers would be significantly reduced. They'd be significantly reduced. Let me talk a little bit about investment. There is a lot of power in investing in comprehensive sex health education, comprehensive reproductive health education. One, we all know, every single person on planet Earth came from a woman. I think in some instances it's hard to hear, but that's just a fact, right? So that's just a fun fact. That said, we only have about 20% of women or even girls in leading positions, even in classrooms, think about the class monitor, think about the class prefect, think about, the class secretary, below 20%. So you have a majority of the male species making decisions for the females, yet the woman, the body of the girl, the body of the woman gets to decide whether we move from one generation to another generation. So that's number one. So that is one thing. This is one of the reasons why I think investing in this space is critical. Number two, the other reason why we should invest is because half the time, organizations working at the grassroots understand their spaces. They know how to program, they know where to program, they know why they're doing it, and they know specifically where. I'll give you an example of our Kenyan context, where we have a region within Kenya that is in northern Kenya that there's just no access. So here you have girls getting married off even at the age of 8. The girls start being treated at the age of 5, where there's like a booking system where girls start getting bidded. And then on top of that, and I don't want to go into female genital mutilation. So these young girls in these spaces, these are hard to reach populations where nobody is trying to go to risk-prone areas. Yet with grassroots organizations, this is their work. This is what they do on an everyday basis, on a day-to-day basis. So one of the reasons why it's critical to really invest in these spaces and in grassroots organizations is because they're able to reach people who are not even able to have access to even this internet, so that they're able to be on this platform, so that they're even able to even understand. These are girls who are in spaces where they've never gone to school, education is not prioritized, but marriage is prioritized, making a family is prioritized. If they're going to be given tasks and chores, education is not a factor. So you end up having girls who they can't read, they can't count, they can't write their names. So then those girls are not able to rise to their agency. And this is something that's very critical as far as investing in this space is concerned. And this is because if we want sustainability for the work that we are doing, if we want sustainability for the programs that we continue to do outside of Kenya, across the world, globally, we really have to make sure that our investments are where they're required. In my work within the years, I quickly learned that girls want to lead, and girls do lead, but girls want to be given the opportunity to lead. So basically within a classroom context, this is where a teacher would have to come to the class and say, so who wants to become the class secretary for English, for example? And the boys will be very quick to lift up their hands because it's easier, right? Like that's how they've been trained. It's always been easy for boys to raise up their hands. So then the girls want to be told, no, not boys, let me have a girl. Then that's when the girl will slowly lift up their hand and she becomes secretary. Then she doesn't know what to do because she's never led, isn't it? And when she starts to lead, she quickly realizes this is actually cool. So then what a girl will always do is that she's always going to build a movement. Women build movements. Girls build movements. So she'll tell a friend who'll tell a friend, that I'm now the English class secretary. And the other girl will think, you know what? We've not chosen a class secretary for physics. So I'm going to be that. So the next time the teacher comes and asks, I'm going to lift up my hand. It was in really, really little things that could not even be measured at the time that we quickly realized that the way that girls rise to their agency is not even necessarily through big curriculums that are taught for weeks on end. It's in really calls to action. When you call girls to action, girls will rise. When you give girls opportunities, girls are always going to rise to their agency. But then there's another flip side of it where how does a girl stay in leadership? How does she not shy away from the bullying, when she's bullied or when a statement is said or when she feels as though, today I really had a bad day and now everyone is saying that I was unfair. And this even happens even in the world where we are now women, we are grown. This still happens, which is just corporate bullying or even, it's bullying at a different level. But then within the context of adolescent girls, it's within this time when they begin to decide what their values are. They want to identify their own values. So when you give a list of values in a classroom and you ask girls, which of these is a value, sometimes they don't even know what to choose because they don't even think that was a big deal. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't steal. I didn't know that's a value. I didn't know being honest is a value. I just thought it's just a character that I have. I just don't do that because in my house, my mom is strict, or in my house, my dad, or in my house, we don't do this. So being able to offer comprehensive health education, one of the things that this does for girls is that it allows for girls to be well-rounded. Health is a very critical component and a critical factor across the world. And I think COVID-19 taught us this. I think we're not making big cases for why we should all invest in health anymore, because everybody knows this. But then how do we sustain the education? How do we sustain what we have taught? How do we sustain the impact as well? And I would like to say to all of us today that being able to do work that is evidence-driven is very critical for sustainability. For us to really properly be able to know and to learn whether we are doing this properly, you have to measure the work that you're doing. Use a mixed methods approach, use a qualitative approach, use a quantitative approach. It really does not matter. What we're trying to do is we do not want to have a monopoly, for example, as girls health ed. We don't want to have a monopoly of we're the only ones who know how to work with girls. No, we want to reach every single girl in the world. That is not possible if we're sitting here and saying, only my organization has the autonomy to do this. All of us want to do this. So how do we properly make sure that that is done? It's evidence. You have to do research. You have to do data collection. And once you do that, you don't leave it on a nice, Google Drive document in your computer. You share that knowledge. You share those numbers. You share the lessons. You share the impact so that if an organization in Asia is trying to do what Kenya already did 5 years ago, they're not making the same mistakes. That way, we are only replicating innovations, we're only replicating creativity, we're only replicating solutions, and we're not necessarily replicating mistakes. Then with leadership, an exercise that over time, I'm working with girls and creating curriculums for girls, around comprehensive health education, and I'll talk about that a little later. So let's talk about leadership. So with leadership, we used to go into classrooms and give girls cue cards where we tell them, and ideally you just look like this. So you just give girls cue cards. And you tell them, write any question you have in your mind, any question. Obviously, girls would say anything. And you know where the head is at, right? So some girls, and those who would be, assumed as geeky will ask questions about education. Then there's those girls who are often the ones who lead the others into situations. And they'll ask, is it okay if I'm having sex already? At what point do I get pregnant? If I'm already, if say, for example, a boy is already, say, fondling my breast, does that mean that I get pregnant? And it was incredible the amount of gaps that already were existing within the reproductive health education that was in school. It was incredibly difficult to reconcile the number of girls who are dropping out of school because of pregnancy versus the number of girls that were not going to complete education, because even after they finished, say, primary education, they got married in between that long holiday where you're waiting to get into secondary school. So one of the things that really rose up from that is that girls want safety. Girls want to be assured that if we're working with you as a grassroots organization, whatever it is that we feel, whatever it is that we think is safe. So as organizations and as individuals that are working in grassroots organizations that are catering to adolescents, we have to make sure that we are providing that environment. And that environment sometimes is in even providing anonymous surveys. That environment is in ensuring that whenever you're going to schools or wherever you're going to these forums where you're meeting girls and you're teaching these things, you're sending people who, one, are people who really respect the adolescents. Number two, these are people who have amazing track records. These are not people who are defiling girls. These are not people who girls are not going to feel safe around. And these are not people who girls are going to hesitate to ask questions when and if they have questions. The other thing is around, say, goal setting, self-management, decision-making, choices. Girls have to be taught this. Girls want to know, girls want to understand what is the essence, when you're teaching a comprehensive health education program, what are the things that you're covering, and I really love Girls' Health Ed approach on movement, on having a movement-based activity, because girls have already said that I struggle with my self-esteem. I don't even know what a self-esteem is. I do this, I struggle with this, I struggle with that. When you create environments where young girls can come and have conversations that are crucial and critical conversations, not just with yourselves as grassroots advocates, but then also with fellow girls, you create an environment that is healthy. You create an environment that is, that is stable. Lastly, I'm going to lead us towards, 6 dimensions of wellness. And, they talk about the occupational, where girls want to live enriched lives, just as everybody else. So this basically means that we're training girls in things that can actually allow them to settle into the world of work when that time comes, and to also understand what their worth is. That way you don't have girls falling into, child labor. You don't have girls falling out of school to just go, and run that business for their parents because they think that money is important or it's critical. It is important. And we're not saying that, the values that we would teach in these classes would be values that take away from what girls are learning as proper positive values at home. What we are saying is we have an all-rounded approach that allows for girls to thrive. Second is the physical, which I really, really love. Movement, when girls move, when adolescents move, they have the freedom, and they feel that they can, when they're flexible, even when you think about health education and whether it's lifestyle diseases, you already have reduced their probability of getting a lifestyle disease just because they exercise. The importance of exercise cannot be, overstated. Then there's the social. Adolescents are young people, number one. Number two, adolescents like to hang out together. There's a lot of peer pressure. If you want to spread a message really, really quickly, tell a young person. If you think about the campaigns that happen across the world right now, even for just social justice, young people know how to do that. They're creative. So they know how to design those campaigns. They know how to design, whether it's the programs, they know exactly how they're going to reach their peers. So we really have to also be emphasizing on how do you create these social circles as young girls? How do you advocate for positive social circles? And how do you ensure that these girls are not being abused, these boys are not being abused within these spaces? Then there's also the intellectual, which will always ignite the creativity. So then girls know where to employ these things, you know, boys know where to employ these things, and they know how to coexist with each other. Then there's spiritual, you know, and whatever spiritual compass that is. I think in each and every program, and as we are working in different spaces in different parts of the world, we quickly realize that, you know, there are communities that have certain beliefs. So how do you make sure that whatever it is that you're teaching is not going against those beliefs? Because if it goes against the beliefs, already then you have built a wall. You've created a wall where even if you're a grassroots organization, you're not able to permeate through that. So there's a lot of thinking that has to happen for us who are doing the curriculums, for us who are running those organizations, for us who are doing that work on a day-to-day basis. Lastly, is the emotional, where we really have to be connected. Even us as the adults who are doing this, we have to be very connected with ourselves, our purposes, whether it's our primary aims. If we are not grounded in something, if we do not believe in something, it's going to not be possible for us to really inspire a generation, inspire the advocacy, you know, become aspirational leaders for young people who then are able to really have, you know, to have a look at us. Now, leading up to 1.8 billion campaign, I think the critical message and what I would really, really love to underscore is the importance of investing in this space and creating advocacy for this space. Thank you so much. Over to you, Pavita.
Thank you so much, Sankara. Thank you so much for highlighting the relationship between comprehensive sexuality and so many other issues that we as youth and adolescents face. And thank you for building upon the importance of grassroots movement. It is because of PMNCH that we were able to send recently one of our teaching fellows to Geneva, to the World Health Organization, to represent Girls Health Ed at the opening plenary of the Global Forum for Adolescents. That is grassroots advocacy in action. So thank you so much for highlighting that. So I am now ready to move on to our panel. So as the panelists are speaking, I encourage everybody in the audience to make use of the Q&A feature, of the chat feature. And again, please make sure that you're using social media throughout the panel. You can use the hashtag 1.8, that's number 1, then spelled POINT, and then number 8. Please tag Girls Health Ed, please tag PMNCH, and please tag the panelists. So there's a quote that I really love that goes, "The universe is not made up of atoms, it's made up of stories." Stories are at the core of advocacy. It is through sharing our stories that we're really able to connect with other people and get them to understand the importance of the issues that are facing us. So I'm going to give each of the panelists 1 minute to share a story that guides you in your advocacy, a story from your personal life or a story from your work that guides you in your advocacy. Each panelist has 1 minute, and let's please start with Celine.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this beautiful space. I'm very excited to be here. So actually my activism journey started with a personal experience. The famous story goes that we were having a casual dinner as a family and talking about the future and universities. And all of a sudden, my back then 6 or 7-year-old little brother looked at me and said, "Why are you worrying so much? If you can't get into a good university or get a well-paid job, you can simply get married and your life would be saved and spared. It is just a matter of choice for women. While for us, men, it is mandatory. We have to work and earn money." I was in complete shock. I was blown away by what my little brother said because I thought I lived in a very, equal, feminist, away from all those gender norms and roles kind of family. But seeing that even my own brother had those thoughts really opened my eyes, since that was the exact moment that I realized that these norms and roles are so engraved in every aspect of society and so normalized that we don't even realize them, that they exist until someone points it out. And these very much normalized norms and roles in gender affect little children, their thought structures, how their minds are shaped, who will be adults one day. Those kids will be adults one day and lead our world, lead the future. So I thought to myself, is that the kind of mindset we want to be led by in the following centuries? Then decided to take action the next day and got in touch with He for She, which is founded initially by young women, and got involved with He for She, and my activism journey started.
What an incredible story, Celine. Thank you so much for sharing that. Next, I'd like to turn over to Sonali.
Thanks, Pavita. So my story and how I started working on sexual reproductive health was I was working as an activist in Sri Lanka on access to safe abortion. And I was constantly confronted in conversations with women who have accessed unsafe abortions and are living with the consequences of unsafe abortions. The heartbreaking truth was that they didn't stand a chance in preventing it, because neither them nor their partners even knew how to prevent a pregnancy, and many of them were not even aware of certain events that happen to them that are considered violations. They didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. It was hard for them to convey because they were not sure exactly what their experience was and whether this experience is bad or good. And yeah, it was really unfortunate to have these conversations with women when you know that what they're describing isn't right. So yeah, that's when we as She Decides realize that abortion rights activism and advocacy, it's not separate from CSE, and seeing that women needed this information was the first way to prevent unsafe abortions occurring. And as Sankara mentioned earlier, the first lesson of CSE is respect and consent. And where else would we get to speak to young people about respect and consent as a core human value than if we don't do it in schools, you know? And yeah, we understand that it improves health-seeking behaviors, but imagine what it could do for social cohesion of a community if we just understand that we needed to respect any gender, all orientations with the same amount of respect we have for ourselves and expect from others. So yeah, the return on investment for CSE is incredible. And I think if we were to look at other ways in which we would prevent unplanned pregnancies, it would be access to contraceptions. And here again, we can see the importance of comprehensive sex education, because yeah, there's benefit, there's value in having access to contraceptives, but then who would teach these women how to negotiate safe sex and ask for that as a right if they don't have the skill set? And that's essentially what CSE does. It empowers you to have choice. And that's what abortion rights is about as well.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Next, I'd like to move on to Angela. And as a reminder to the panelists, please just spend 1 minute sharing your story so that we can make time for the discussion and for all the panelists.
Thank you so much, Pavita, and everyone else who is joining. Greetings from Dakar, Senegal. I am really not in my usual space, using my phone because the network is really terrible and I have to look for it. I think for me, it started as being a health worker, and for that matter, a midwife. It was almost obvious that when younger people came to me, they were scared when they came for care and everything. And I really got to understand what is making younger mothers get scared of me. And it was a bit awkward for me as a health worker providing service, because it was almost impossible to connect because I'd not been trained on anything that has to do with the younger generations, the younger people, when they come to me as a health worker. And so it is when I started interrogating and I realized that my training did not really prepare me for what I was getting across. And that's why I started asking questions, and through my asking and not really wanting to understand the status quo and why the status quo remained, that I decided that something needed to change. And health workers, myself included, needed really to understand what are the real needs of this group of people. And that's why I decided I am going to be an advocate of the same and ensure that everybody understands what this is and what it means, because the misinformation, the disinformation is actually the problem that we do have. Thank you, and back to you, Pavita.
Thank you, Angela. Bridget, over to you.
Thank you, Pavita. My journey started at the campus when I had a conversation of girls talking about family planning and how they operate. But so I got interested, and therefore I joined all of the organizations, IY. And then when I got to learn what family planning really means, what it entails, and I found that people have a lot of misconceptions around family planning. I felt like this is the time now to start talking about family planning, among other things like abortion, and giving girls and women the right information so that they stop passing information of misconceptions and all these myths around family planning. And then after being assaulted, me as a person, that the drive, the feeling that I had of helplessness, that I didn't have someone to talk to or a place to go, even drove my attention to even wanting to be part of the change makers in the society. And that's how I found myself. Yeah, over to you, Pavitra.
Thank you, Bridget. Ranu?
Hi, thank you, Pavitra. So, as my story began, I belongs to a middle class family, and I grown up very much in poverty, and so seen very much into my community and all the people. That time I realized that all the things are very normal. Women and girl don't deserve education and all the things, because I was not that much aware or educated that way. And our society think that a girl and woman don't have to get that much education, because she has to just to get married, to cook or bring children and all this thing. She don't have to work or earn or something like that. But when I grown up, I did my college and all this thing. I learned that how much contribution many of female are making into our global economy and all this social change and lots of things. So and also I am a health worker. So going to community and interact with women was so hard in the beginning, because they don't accept me, especially as being as a male, to talk about reproductive health or sexual health. But it takes time, and now many of them are start accepting. Even I do workshop in school and community. So I realized that how much importance it is to give women and girls to right to education and to work, to earn, and just have the life they want to live. We male or boys don't have right to give them any rights they deserve and they have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ranu. And finally, Arpan, what is your story?
Okay, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by first thanking the Lenni Lenape, on whose land I'm speaking from tonight. My activism story actually was very funny. I was part of a volunteer group that were doing a climate rally for the first time to the UN during the UNGA. And as I was with them, I realized that a lot of the people in that rally had passion, but they were misdirected. And I was, funnily enough, one of those people. So as I connected with different people, I networked, I realized, this is something that I wanted to do. And I reached out to different NGOs and different climate groups. And that's how I began my activism journey. Thank you, Pavita.
Thank you so much, Arpan. So we have some incredible stories, and I just want to emphasize the importance that, if you've had something personal happen to you, let that be the fuel for the activism that will move you forward and that will eventually make the world and future generations better. So now I've prepared some specific questions for each of our panelists, and I'd like to start with Celine. So Celine, you work in gender equality, and your incredible story about changing social and cultural norms around gender equality really spoke to me. So I'd love it if you could talk to us briefly about why is comprehensive sexuality education such a critical piece of the puzzle for gender equality?
Thank you so much for this very important question. Well, comprehensive sexuality education is a critical piece of the puzzle for gender equality, since it provides young people with knowledge and skills related to their sexual and reproductive health and rights. This empowers them to make informed decisions about their own bodies, which is fundamental for achieving gender equality. As the saying goes, my body, my choice. When people have the knowledge and autonomy to make choices about their sexual and reproductive health, they are better equipped to assert their rights and make choices for them, for what makes them happy and safe. Through CSE, we can challenge harmful gender-based stereotypes By challenging traditional gender roles and norms, CSE helps break down barriers to gender equality. Moreover, when young people have access to these information and services, they can make choices that safeguard their health, reduce unintended pregnancies, and ensure healthy pregnancies when desired. This will lead to women's and girls' well-being in every aspect of life, whether it's economical, social, political, education. Furthermore, CSE teaches young people about consent, respect, and healthy relationships. This knowledge can and will contribute to a reduction in gender-based violence and harassment in any shape and form. By fostering an understanding of boundaries and promoting respectful interactions, CSE plays a crucial role in creating safer environments for every individual. In other words, comprehensive sexuality education is absolutely essential for achieving global gender equality by providing knowledge, empowerment, and the tools needed to navigate health relationships and reproductive rights and choices, ultimately fostering a more equitable and inclusive and diverse society for all.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, Celine. So Celine, you've done all of this work at Anga, you've done work at Girl Up, you've represented your country, Turkey. You've created the Girls Who Code chapter in your country. So through all of this, what have you learned? What are some of the most important ways that girls and young women specifically can advocate for themselves and their communities for the issues that are important to them?
I think if girls and young women want to advocate for themselves and their communities, they should definitely actively participate in leadership roles within their communities, like it has been said many times, even during this panel. But we cannot emphasize it enough. This can be by community organizations, their schools, or the local government. And this can help demonstrate the capacity of girls and young women to be influential leaders and decision makers, having a seat at the table, claiming that seat. I am one of those people who believe in campaigns, raising awareness. So I would say organize awareness campaigns on issues where girls and women are primarily affected, such as gender-based violence, access to healthcare, and menstrual hygiene. You can also raise awareness through hosting workshops, seminars like these, or social media campaigns to promote the dialogue and create change, foster that conversation. I'd also like to add that mentorship is the key. You can establish a mentorship program where experienced women mentors from different sectors of the field could offer their unique guidance, support, and empowerment to young girls to navigate challenges and make informed decisions. Also, I highly recommend that you get a mentor for yourself. It is always an incredible experience. Lastly, you can always join or create advocacy groups that focus on gender equality, women's rights, and youth empowerment. These groups can work collectively to influence policy changes and address the issues in your community. Through these advocacy steps that you take, you will either intentionally or unintentionally, either way, you will build incredible networks with like-minded girl leaders, organizations, and activists to amplify the voices of young girls and young women. Networking is, again, key to your advocacy and to create change. So that is highly recommended. And I know it is hard. I know the challenges, sometimes, especially as a youth advocate, it feels like no one understands you, right? Even the people you are closest to, like your family and friends. And it can be upsetting because been there, done that, still struggling from time to time. But remember that if everyone understood what you were doing, you wouldn't have to do it in the first place, right? A little philosophy there. So please do know that you're not alone. I am with you, I'm here for you, and so are the thousands of other youth advocates from all across the globe working passionately and resiliently to create a meaningful change in this beautiful world. So stay determined, inspired, and empowerment. You got this, girl.
Thank you so much for that, Celine. Your passion is absolutely contagious.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I know that you have to hop on early because you are a student and you have class to get to. But I mean, you already did this very nicely in your answer to the question, but just no more than 30 seconds. What is your message to fellow youth advocates?
Again, I mean, I don't even need 30 seconds. I need one slogan because I'm a he for she advocate. And our slogan, our motto is, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? So please manifest that, internalize that. Just look at the mirror and say that every time you wake up and go to bed. And again, we are with you and here for you. And let's create concrete and sustainable change together. Because if not us, then who?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Celine. Whenever you have to hop off to get to class, please do. Thank you so much for your presence here today. We're so fortunate that you were able to take the time to chat with us. And again, thank you for your passion and for everything that you do.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to turn over to Angela. Angela of White Ribbon Alliance Kenya, and also who serves on the chair, the board of Girls Health Ed. So Angela, at White Ribbon Alliance Kenya, you teach youth, adolescents advocacy for CSE. If you could briefly talk about what are some of the key skills and lessons that you teach them.
Thank you so much, Pavita. And again, I'll say apologies, some background noise because I'm in a hall somewhere. But I think for me, besides the usual CSE, there's also so much that we teach girls around their power and agency. One of the strongest beliefs that I have as Angela is that girls and women in general are born with power. It's a society that takes away that power and then comes back again to blame and say, oh, women have no power, girls have no power. We need to give them power. For us, we believe that at the end of the day, we need to be able to ignite the power and voice in girls to be able to stand up for themselves. And I think it's so important because for the longest time, when we talk about CSE, even when you mention it in so many boardrooms and in so many spaces and the like, it is one of the most misunderstood things. If you talk about sexual reproductive health, people misunderstand it. Why? Because there's, as I said earlier, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of that is not understood. You hear people in the media talking about sex education, and that's why we get it wrong, because it should be sexuality education. You hear in different places when health workers talk about, or churches or religious groups talking about things that they don't understand. So for us, it's important that people understand what exactly are these terminologies. We break them down in pieces. If it is sexuality education, if it is sex, if it's gender, it's comprehensive, it's age appropriate. It is about power. What does all this mean? And for us, it's very important so that people can quite understand what are we talking about. I remember many times I've been called to host, maybe to moderate sessions or to give keynote speeches or to actually talk to media. And most of the times you hear questions and I keep on reminding people, no, this is it. So we realize at the end of the day, then just talking to girls alone and teaching them is not what is essential. We need to teach the broader sector. We need to teach the church. We need to teach the policymakers. We need to teach programmers. We need to teach donors. We need to teach families and so much more. So for us, it is so encompassing. It's a community conversation. And at the end of the day, it is not just doesn't end there in the trainings. It is actually building them on how to self-organize and to use their power to build a movement for their voice, for their spaces in the different places. But much more. I think it's the keynote speaker, I can't remember her name now again. I think it's gone off my radar. We believe in collaborating with others. And I think that's why we've been able to collaborate with Girls Health Ed, for example, because we believe nobody as the custodian of the knowledge. Collaboration is so much because when you go alone, you go far. You go fast, but when you go together, you go far. Why we've been able to really remain and keep on growing in the spaces because we have collaborated with groups from all walks of life, refugee groups, women and girls living in the slums, women living in along the coastal zones, women in nomadic settings and the like, because all these girls, all these growing up young women have different needs. They are not homogeneous. And at the end of the day, we want to understand. And before we do even our training, we use our ask, listen, act approach. we go to listen to the self-articulated needs. What are your needs? What are your realities? What is it that is really lacking in your space? What is needed? Because again, we don't want to do blanket solutions. So we create the solutions with them by listening to them, understanding them, going to prioritize back and conversing with them to really understand what are the priorities. Then after that, we build their agency and voice to understand their rights and entitlements. And then we work together to really create the movement through our action agendas, our advocacy skills that we build, and accountability skills. But we don't also end there. After a few months, we go back to collect feedback. The feedback loop for us is really important in programming. We don't just want to tick a box. We want to ensure that it is ingrained. And that is why there's power in the approach that we use. The ask, listen, act approach for us is really a game changer. Back to you, Pavita. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I think you actually answered my next question, which was how can grassroots campaigns go national and multinational? And you spoke about the importance of collaboration. And I love what you said. When you go alone, you go fast. When you go together, you go far. So, and our next panelist, Bridget, is actually going to be talking a lot about the importance of collaboration. But Angela, while I have you, what would be your 30-second message for fellow youth advocates, your message of hope or inspiration?
I think for me, it's what I call my 4 Ps. When I was starting up, it was very easy to give up. But I have decided that for me to continue, I've looked back and analyzed, why have I really continued? Why am I still in this space? Which of course I need to be retiring soon because I feel like I've already built a group of others. I think for me, it is what I call the 4 critical Ps for my work in advocacy, because it can be very draining. And Pavita, I'm sure by now you know that it can really be very draining, especially when you are trying to change policies and practice. For me, my 4 Ps are these. I start with the 3, and then of course the other one is because of my religious upbringing. It is the element around perseverance. No, first is the passion to seek change. Then there's perseverance. Then there's persistence. Persistency, because at the end of the day, advocacy change does not happen overnight, especially in the space that we are in, because it's very controversial. But the last thing that I do is prayer. I keep praying. And because for me, it's very important because of my religious background. So the persistent passion and perseverance, for me, really ground who I am and who I've been over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for persevering and persisting through your internet issues. And again, for taking the time to be with us, even amidst your travels. You mean so much to us, and it is an honor and a pleasure to collaborate with White Ribbon Alliance Kenya. So here's to continuing to going together and going far. Bridget, that is a great segue into what I would love to discuss with you. So Bridget, you are the program manager in Kenya for Girls Health Ed. And what I'd love to chat with you about is that a really critical component of our curriculum with Girls Health Ed is that it's co-created with the girls and young women we're serving. And I would love it if, as the program manager in Kenya, can you talk to us about this co-creation process and how that is an example of youth advocacy in and of itself? Bridget, have we lost you? Bridget, are you with us? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so Girls Health Ed, as Girls Health Ed, we have a curriculum that is co-created by girls and women that undertake the program. So one of the things we do is once the curriculum has been established, then we take it to the ground, because the girls and the women that take our program they are the consumers. So we need to be friendly and acceptable for them, and also within the community that they live in, because again, we have ethical and cultural barriers within the country. Therefore, we take that curriculum to them and then discuss it with them and see whether it's okay. And then whatever they want to be put in the curriculum that best suits their needs, that's what we put in the curriculum. We also involve the legal aspect, whereby we bring key policymakers so that they can also help us in establishing the curriculum. In that, once we are passing this information, we won't face any legal issues within the communities that we do our programs. Therefore, it's co-created by the girls, and also we bring in the legal aspect. We also try to bring in religious leaders in that, religion in Kenya is one of they are the key actors, and they are key influencers in the community. Therefore, if we also we leverage on the religious leaders within the community, so that we'll be
So Bridget, I think we might have lost you. But the last thing that we heard you say was bringing in religious leaders from the community. Was there something that you said after that?
No, you
Okay.
haven't had me at all.
We heard you say bringing in religious leaders from the communities, and then after that, I think it went out. So if you said something after that, we lost you.
Yeah, so sorry. I'm having some technical issues. I don't know why, but I really am. So kindly forgive me on that.
That's okay.
But as I was saying, our curriculum is co-created by the girls and women that undertake our program. So once the curriculum is established, we take back to the ground, to the community to implement this program. And then we interact with the girls and women and ask them, what you really need? Is this really what you want? Does it really suit your needs within your community? And once they're okay with it, then we also bring in the legal aspect, whereby we work with policymakers so that it will, in the legal aspect, we won't face any legal challenge within the community. And also we bring religious leaders because they're the key influencers within the community. So when we bring these three people together, then our curriculum becomes acceptable within the society and different communities that we do the program. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. And you answered my second question about who are the key partners. So bringing in the policymakers and the religious leaders is very important for getting buy-in from the community. So Bridget, what would be your 30-second or less message of inspiration or hope for fellow youth advocates?
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, Bridget.
Yes.
Yes. What would be your 30-second message of hope or inspiration for fellow youth advocates?
So one of the things is I'll talk about partnership. Partnership is the key to change in the community. We need to bring in religious leaders because they are key influencers. We need also to interact with community leaders for the acceptability and mobilization of the girls and women within the community. And through that, we have formed a solution-based partnership within Nairobi County, and we're also expanding the same in other communities. And then also collaboration with other NGOs and CBOs that deal with other programs like implementation and service delivery. Through that, we touch each and every single aspect within SRHR. So as an educating organization, when we partner with all these other stakeholders, then our programs becomes acceptable. My parting shot will be education and knowledge. Education through knowledge and skills is the key to change. And there's no feeling more satisfying than seeing the change within the community, no matter how small it is. Therefore, as young people, as advocates, we should always do our best to try and see and try and make change in our community, because that one voice will make a very good change in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Next, I would love to turn it over to Sonali. So Sonali, you've done some incredible work in Sri Lanka. So now we're shifting geographically from Kenya and the Middle East to Southeast Asia. So can you talk about what your campaign in Sri Lanka looked like?
In Sri Lanka, maybe I just set the scene of what Sri Lanka's context is very quickly. In Sri Lanka's context, we don't have comprehensive sex education as a fully integrated part of the school curricula. And there are efforts to introduce it as incremental age-appropriate CSE, but they're very slow, and even the present efforts, I would say, are outdated, and because they're not really done with meaningful youth engagement. So it lacks depth and relevance to young people. And there's also a very strong unified pushback from certain groups of the community in Sri Lanka. And their community resistance is very, very much fear-based. But yeah, to me, we really saw the need to highlight that it just feels criminal, that this information is out there and it is being actively denied, and it isn't being allowed. It's being prevented from reaching the people that need it, because we want to continue to live in this delusion of, like a Victorian more or less society. And we started to question, like, who does this benefit? Who benefits from us withholding this information? And it's definitely not young people. So when we are in the interest of creating systems that support young people and to ensure that they have fulfilled lives, we need to keep confronting the question, who do our actions benefit? And since we started challenging that, we started being more loud and more unified within the feminist networks, LGBTQ networks, that we are going to push for CSE as an umbrella effort. So yeah, that's really all that I wanted to say about Sri Lanka and the program that we're working on.
Great. And can you briefly talk about how you overcome social, cultural, and structural barriers in your work?
So with what we've experienced, I think this was spoken about earlier as well, but remembering to stick to evidence-based advocacy and really grounding your advocacy in what you know to be true. And this doesn't necessarily have to be research, it can also be lived experience. And when you're met with resistance that's emotive and fear-based, I think the strongest tool that you have in your arsenal is evidence-based advocacy. And also, I think there's a tendency for the resistance to be really loud, and it can seem that is the majority of the population are against these ideas. But the truth is that you need to focus your advocacy on the maybe middle, the larger part of the population that doesn't have the information to form an opinion on whether or not they support CSE. That's your target audience, and not necessarily countering the resistance, because many of them have already formed their opinion, and as loud as they are not very many. So yeah, what you also mentioned, cultural barriers. I think in Sri Lanka, one that is like a hidden, maybe less conspicuous barrier, apart from, and not to say that social and cultural barriers are not, they're definitely red flags. There are definitely challenges with them in Sri Lanka, but we are not talking so much about structural barriers. And in the Sri Lanka context, we do see some movement around social norms and even the language around CSE. There is some momentum with the younger generations and younger activists coming on board, but they meet a lot of resistance, and they meet a brick wall when it comes to our institutions. They are not able to adapt and operate to the time, and they're not able to address the need. Because there isn't, like, for example, in Sri Lanka, there isn't a formalized mechanism of working and putting out a certain output that is both the child of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. There isn't a formalized way for these two institutions to work together. So when we put out this one CSE example, it was a grade 7 book, when we were met with resistance, the institutions that are accountable and should be standing behind CSE sort of disintegrated, because there wasn't a standing operating procedure that said this was how this organization worked with this organization. And when the resistance was met, nobody wants to put their head on the chopping block, and everyone was like, oh, this isn't ours. This was the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Education said, nope, that was the Ministry of Health. So without these kinds of formalized mechanisms of working, it's very difficult when we are only addressing the wider issues, when the actual how to get CSE out is not thought about. And I like to think of it as like cleaning up the house first, and yeah, and it's in these crucial spaces that I would like to see young people, because these institutions are only able to adapt their mechanisms of working when they are working with the people that they should be serving.
Thank you, Sonali. And then finally, what would be your 30-second message of inspiration and hope for fellow youth advocates?
My 30 seconds of inspiration is maybe just to be aware that your advocacy, though it's in the political space, the political is personal, and the things that you want to see as changes in your society are also things that you will most likely be defending at home. So that can be exhausting. And I see you, I know that it can be exhausting. But I also want to remind you that it's worth it. And we do have an obligation to be more ethical than the society that we grow up in. And this is the only way that we can ensure that future generations will inherit systems that support them, that are for them, that are created with them, so that they can live fulfilled lives. And that's really, you know, rounding back to my work in abortion rights and the right to choose, it's really the bare minimum that we can ensure future generations when we are choosing to bring life into the world.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Next, I'd like to turn over to Ranu. So Ranu, you are the chapter leader of Period Bihar, and you are a male in this space. So can you talk to us about like how did you become get into this work, and talk about your experience as a male in the menstrual health space?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So as I said earlier, I've grown up in a middle class family and belongs to poverty, and also period or menstruation is something that I never ever discussed or even get educated about it in either in my family or in school or high school. So I always felt like this is something just belong to female or girl, woman. And when I grown up and when I was in high school, so there was a chapter called reproductive health and all, and it was totally skipped by our ma'am, and I requested her like two, 3 times just to give us all this information and knowledge to us. And then she one day she gave us all this brief, but she said she just gave brief knowledge, not in depth or not in detail all the chapters and summaries. So she just gave us brief knowledge and said, this is enough for your exam. You don't need to be get all these things because this is not related that much. And she skipped. And later I went to my college where I got chance to learn more about that. And then I realized that how much it is important to our community, especially male or boys or male for both, to get educated about menstruation, reproductive health, sexual health, because as a family, it is not belong just to any specific gender or something. It is, and also menstruation is not just related to woman or girl. It's related to women. We all come out just because of, we exist because of the process of period. So we should be get knowledgeable, get aware about what it is, why it's happened and all. So yeah, I found that it is very important for all of us to get knowledge, get addresses, and spread awareness and knowledge into our community, family, and especially make it as a normal topic, not something stigmatized or something we should feel shy or not to talk with our family or someone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranu. And then you spoke to my second question about why is it important to engage boys and men in advocacy around menstrual health. So what would be your 30-second message of hope or inspiration for youth advocates?
Thank you. So my advice will be like, first of all, believe in yourself and the purpose you are choosing to work on. Anything, it could be gender related, it could be sexual health, menstrual health, or human rights, or climate activist, anything, it could be you. So once you choose your purpose, try to connect with like-minded people and try to research, get educated yourself first, and connect with community people. Like we all are here, like we are connected and we spread knowledge, education, and resources with each other. So it is what we need. Obviously, there was time when I feel so much down because I don't find people who value my work or even see that this is something I have to do. They advise me something else to do, which maybe I'm not that much interested or maybe I'm not good at. So yeah, it's very much important to connect with good people or who are working in this field. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing up climate activism, because that is the perfect segue into our last but not least panelist, Arpan Patel. So Arpan, you are a youth climate activist, and Arpan and I actually met recently at UNGA, and I've been so impressed with, in addition to being a medical student at CUNY, you take the time to go to all of these UN events and be an advocate for climate justice. So I would love it, given the theme of today's conversation, what is the link between comprehensive sexuality education and climate change?
Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction. That was too much. But yes, coming back to the question, there is a very small yet very undiscussed link. Climate change affects adolescents and children at a rate that, we don't often have conversations on this. Climate activism is important, but that's also, coming with a lot of stress, anxiety. There's a lot of sort of mental consequences, emotional consequences. There's a lot of trauma and distress that's associated with that. So the linkage is when you sort of have these comprehensive sexual education, because when we talk about that, we're not only talking about your physical health or your sexual health, we're also talking about the sociological, the psychological, emotional, as well as spiritual. So when you equip the adolescents and children at a younger age about these well-rounded education, you're also telling them to go educate themselves about what's happening around their environment. For example, there was a study that was done last year, and they asked a group of young people what was their biggest, cause of stress. And a lot of them said, a lot of their stress comes from reading the news about how the planet is damaged, how there's a lot of, unpredictable weather happening. So when we sort of teach our children how to cope with that, how to become resilient to that, when you provide them with, education, when you provide them with some sort of training that can support them as well as elevate them in their advocacy effort, that is one way that we can, round up this relationship between comprehensive sexual education and climate action.
Thank you for that. So what would be your 30-second message of hope or inspiration for fellow youth advocates?
Well, the funny thing is, when it comes to youth advocacy, there is no one right or wrong way to do it. So I will say, do not wait for a template on how to become an activist. Just, get out there, speak out, be outspoken, because at the end of the day, it is us that have this collective responsibility to care for the planet that we live in, as well as our fellow humans that, we are part of this whole global community.
Thank you so much, Arpan. And extra round of applause to all of our panelists today for such a rich discussion and for talking about your experiences on the ground and being an inspiration for all those other youth advocates who will follow. So we have about 20 minutes left in our webinar, and I would love to open it up to questions from the audience for our panelists, but I would also love this to be an opportunity for the panelists to engage with one another and perhaps ask questions of one another. So please make use of the Q&A function. Panelists, please feel free to engage with one another. And as a reminder to our audience members, use the hashtag 1.8, number 1, then spelled out POINT, and then number 8, and tag Girls Health Ed, tag PMNCH, and tag our panelists. So audience, panelists, the floor is yours. Sarah.
Hi, I'm not able to come on video, it seems. It doesn't allow me. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Pavita, and thank you to all speakers for this really impactful discussion. I think this is probably one of the best panels we've had, and it just goes to show that we should shut up and listen to young people more. So my question It's just because there has been such a backlash and actually a global rollback of sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender equality. What should we do differently in our activism and our advocacy to counter this rollback? Sonali pointed to a really great anecdote and piece of wisdom where she said that we should really be targeting the maybe middle. And I really love this advice. And so I'm curious to hear from other speakers on, what their tactics are to continue to make impact despite this global backlash. Thank you so much. And by the way, just for those who don't know me, I'm founder and board chair of Girls Health Ed. And we're celebrating over 11 years, and also Pavita is coming up on 10 years, and so we're just so delighted to have you all with us today, and we hope this is the first of many conversations.
So does anybody have any responses for Sarah? Yes, Sankara.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think you bring up a very potent question. And one of the things is that obviously context really matters, and context is context within the sense that we are living in a global village. But there's one thing that we have been offered, that is the digital space. And this digital space has really connected continents and people from different parts of the world. I think one of the ways to do it and do it well is through digital advocacy. One, because digital advocacy always leaves a footprint. So regardless of whether the advocacy lives beyond your time or whether you live, for a shorter time, that digital advocacy stays there. And I think that just goes to just also, when you think about it, a lot of the social media campaigns that we have heard about as adults now, with our, I would say, big ages right now, when we were younger, we did not have digital campaigns because the digital space was not as interconnected as it is now. Right now, a lot of even the diseases, think about COVID-19. One of the ways that the reduction of that was done properly was through the spread of information that was coming out through the digital space. Obviously, that doesn't mean that it's a direct path. It's not a direct route, because there are also so many things that the internet does. For example, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of miscommunication, there's a lot of misrepresentation. But then I do think that because even the right facts and the right information exists still within the digital space, digital advocacy is something that can allow us to continue going into those spaces where we've even been asked not to go. And again, through collaboration, like for example, we have someone from Sri Lanka, we have Kenya, we have India, we have different places, my organization, for example, could clamor, for that attention towards reproductive health, into ensuring that health sex education is being taught in Sri Lanka. It's possible for me to do that in Kenya, So then through that collaboration, I'm also offering camaraderie to fellow people and fellow grassroots organizations. So I think the digital space is something that we can definitely take advantage of. Thank you.
Sonali.
Yeah, just to very quickly add onto what was already mentioned, I think it would be good for us to take an honest, hard look at how we're funding SRHR and how that funding, and what are the terms and conditions that funding comes with, where does that funding come, and how does it impact the programs that are operating in the Global South. For example, like I mentioned in the questions that I answered, there's a big difference from having access to contraception and not being able to negotiate that safe sex. So if we continue to channel money into what is maybe not so controversial, which is access to contraception, and we're not challenging the real issue, a lot of the activists, a lot of the organizations, a lot of civil society groups that are working on this, because there is a lack of a system support for CSE, they are based on donor support. And I think it's really important to have an honest conversation about where that money is coming from and how we are allowed to use it.
Bridget.
For me, what I'll say is partnership is the key. Because when you work alone, the impact of when it might not be as great as when you work as a team, when you work together as all these CEOs and NGOs together, and also when all the key actors, all the key influences of change in the community have come together. For example, leaders, the right holders who are the girls and young women, and then include parents, community leaders, and all this. When they come together, and then after the NGOs and CEOs, we collaborate with them and try and implement the program together. We will experience change. Thank you.
Thank you. Churchill, you have a question.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. So thank you for this opportunity. Mine is not a question, but it's just a congrats for having such forum, having such a conversation, interaction, and I'm so proud of how I see young people are now currently taking space. I'm so happy. I was just following up, and I'm so much delighted because this is what we are doing actually in Kenya. That is what we are trying to make sure that young people are taking up spaces. Concerning donor funding, concerning advocacy, concerning policies and reforms. For the longest time, people have been talking for young people because young people never had the voice. But now it's a game changer because as young people, it's high time we take up a change and we go to those spaces where we used to be represented by older people. We change the narrative, we become us, and we talk about what we feel can work best for us. So kudos for the great work. I am really impressed, and thank you so much. To more opportunity and to more interactions like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Churchill. Sankara, you had a question for your fellow panelists. How can we ensure that we're including DIE and mental health in adolescent programming? Would anybody like to respond to Sankara? Yes, Arpan.
I can go.
No, after you, please go ahead, after you.
After me?
Just to
Yes, Sonali, yes, please.
Yeah, just to answer very quickly, I think we need to start thinking about DIE, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as not a separate entity that we think about only when we're reporting and monitoring, but also something that we think about when we're planning and the very early stages of our program, so that it's not a separate part of a program. And I think in the past, gender used to be considered as gender mainstreaming, and we would think about gender issues at the end of any health program. So when we start to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we also look at the person as a whole and their intersectional identity, which also you wouldn't be missing out on mental health. It's one of the aspects. You'd also be covering things like what is their socioeconomic standard, what is their reality in which they live in. So if you meaningfully include DEI at the start, I think you will be taking a holistic approach in your programs.
Thank you, Sonali. Arpan, please.
Yeah, she answered the question very well. I was just going to say the same as well, creating meaningful collaborative spaces where we can discuss ideas. And it's very important to sort of encapsulate all of these at a grassroots level, because that's where the majority of the action happens. We need to stop treating mental health as a stigma. We need to start thinking of it as how can we offer solutions so that more young people, more adolescents can be comfortable enough to come out and say, I'm not feeling okay, I'm not doing well, and I need help. So we need to create those spaces as well where it's not, stigmatized, it's not considered as a bad thing. And when we sort of include these in our grassroots advocacy and our education programs, then we might, start to make a meaningful difference.
Thank you. So I see Geneva typed in the chat, what inspired each of you to get into advocacy? And I see that Bridget has shared her response about myths and misconception around SRHR, the fact that because of myths and misconception, girls end up making wrong decisions. And this inspired her, Bridget, this inspired you to want to give girls the right information. I know that at the beginning of the talk, some of you shared what inspired you to get into advocacy, but if anybody else wants to share what inspired you to get into this work, please, the floor is yours. Arpan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to type it in the chat, but I said the biggest reason why, and as you mentioned, Pavitra, when we were at the UNGA, there is a sort of lack of interactive spaces for youth. Usually, even in youth-oriented events and speaker forums, majority of the panel or the people that are asking the questions are adults that have no idea what they're talking about. So one of the reasons why I got into doing this is so I can at least amplify youth voices. I can create maybe safe spaces where youth can come and share ideas. So one of the NGOs that I worked with, we used to actually go to high schools where we used to host debates on, if you are a world leader, how would you solve XYZ problems? And you would be surprised with the ideas that these young people had. But unfortunately, they weren't able to get anywhere further than that because there just weren't enough spaces for them to get on and speak at. So that was one of the reasons why I do what I do, even though, you know, it does become challenging.
Thank you. Ranu, I think you also had something you wanted to share.
Thank you. One thing I want to add on mental health, obviously, Arpan mentioned a lot. So, and today is World Mental Health Day. So, first of all, I want to wish you all. So, I think mental health is something is also stigmatized too much into our society, just like reproductive health and sex ed and all. We don't address mental health as a need or that term. We see it's like an illness, just an illness or same or something that we don't even talk that much openly, even in educational sector or workplaces or at home or society. So I think mental health, we just need to treat it just like we do for our, for example, physical health. Like if I get my hand broken or anything, so immediately my parent or people will suggest me to go to visit a doctor or get a plaster and all these medicines and all. But when I say that I don't feel good, I am not feeling well mentally, and or I feel mentally ill or something, nobody will suggest me to go to take therapy or counseling or take rest, go for a walk or talk to someone or say what you are feeling and so. So this is what we need to create in our society. We need to normalize mental health, just treat it good as we are doing for the physical health and all these things. So yeah, that is one. And another, how I came into advocacy. So I shared already, but I want to add few of topics that how I get into that. Obviously, there are lots of topics which I found I need to address and I need to work because I want to make implementation, make things better for my community and people around the world. And also there are lots of people who I connected through social media or in person. I attended lots of workshops. So that is something which gave me more perspective to get into advocacy and why it's needed. And because it's not just someone who get the right position who is sitting on the parliament or somewhere on a big place, but advocacy can be happen through like on the ground level, like in college or in our small society or community, and anywhere we can lead that. So that is we need to address as an positive term that advocacy should be normalized to take. It's not something superpower like building missile or something, but it is something we need to address and try to contribute for positive change and making people's life better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranu. We have a question from Gloria from Tanzania. To what extent do your country's policies and laws act as barriers in advocating for CSE? Sankara, I saw that you had your hand up. Was that for this question or?
Yes, I could answer that question. I think when it comes to government or rather governance, legislation and policies, it's a lot, it's very complex, and particularly when you start to think about regions, you know, we have a lot of charters that have been signed, you know, be it the Maputo Protocol, be it the Beijing Declaration, be it CEDAW, you know, so there's a lot of big documents that have already been signed by countries, and by countries being a part of specific regional, say, blocks. So I think with that, the only thing that you could possibly do is just heighten your advocacy, you know, the way, because advocacy, once again, can speak either against something, it can speak for something, it can speak with and by something. So I think advocacy is often going to really be the best approach for you to take. And I really liked what was said earlier on, you know, that you could do campaigns, you know, you could do posters, you could do adverts, you could do songs, you could do festivals. You know, there's so many ways to try and change the minds of policymakers, because most times, remember that policymakers are rarely on the ground. It's assumed that they're on the ground, but they're rarely within the grassroots. Then I think lastly, what I'd like to say is that one thing that I think we should all continue to stay very, very in touch with is the meaning of the work that we do and the purpose of the work that we do. At the end of the day, we know why we do this, you know, we know why we want to focus on this, like regardless of, you know, there's a lot of reasons why. And it was very inspirational to even hear how all of us started, you know, on this journey. So I think my bottom line really is, you know, you have to be very intentional. Let's remain very intentional, because then when we're intentional, we're also purposeful. When we're purposeful, we're also intentional. And yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sankara. We have time for one more question. So Anusha from the UK asked if somebody, and maybe Bridget, I'll turn this over to you because I see your hand is up. Can you share a success story from Kenya or any other LIMC, low middle income country that you know of, a success story from your advocacy? And please, just 30 seconds before we close out. So it seems like Bridget might be having some technical issues. If anybody just has, again, no more than 30 seconds, please share a success story from an LIMC. If you have one. Okay, well, we have 1 minute left in our panel, so perhaps if you do have answers to these questions, please continue the conversation on social media. You know, tag Girls Health Ed, tag PMNCH, tag your fellow panelists and speakers. I wanted to thank everybody who has stuck around for this hour and a half for this most important and incredible conversation. To the panelists, I couldn't be more impressed. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you do and for making the time to be part of this conversation with Girls Health Ed and PMNCH. As Sarah said, thank you, Sarah, for coming on. This is just the beginning. As Ranu mentioned, today is World Mental Health Day. Tomorrow is International Day of the Girl. Tomorrow is also the beginning of the Global Forum for Adolescents, which I hope to see many of you attending. This is going to be the first of many conversations, and it all starts with us. So keep going. Again, thank you for your time and looking forward to the rest of the conversation. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.